Welcome back to the second part of our discussion on task analysis. My name is April Rose Peshniak, and in this section we are going to review how to create a task analysis and review some examples of task analysis. Now we know a lot about task analysis, but how do we go about creating one for a student? First, you will identify the target task you want the student to learn. Then, determine the steps needed to complete the task. Here you have an example of the breakdown of steps for brushing your teeth, just so you can get an idea. But maybe you want Anne to learn to write her name. You need to think of the steps needed to complete the task. Anne would need to write a capital A, lowercase n, and another lowercase n. This may seem basic, but it is important to think about the prerequisites needed. This may create more steps or require the expansion on the steps. For example, in order to write the A, Anne has to know how to identify the letter A and what it looks like. Anne also needs to know the proper way to hold a pencil. Even more simply, Anne needs to know which hand is dominant and used for writing. If these skills are determined to be unfamiliar, then the teacher will need to backtrack and teach those skills first. They may even require their own separate task analysis. Then, still before implementing, have someone else complete the tasks verbatim to make sure you have included everything. If that checks out, gather any needed materials. For handwriting, you would need paper, a pencil, a table or desk to work at, and Anne's reinforcer, whatever that may be. Then, determine the chaining procedure best for the student and decide how the skill will be taught. Is Anne going to be taught the task with total task presentation, or would that overwhelm her? Are you going to model the skill for Anne? Will a visual model suffice? Does she need to see a video to recreate the slant for the side of the A? Once all of those decisions have been made, it is time to implement the task and make sure to monitor progress along the way. Are the steps appropriate? Do steps need to be broken down further? What steps have been mastered? This should be kept track of on a data sheet for the task analysis with all the steps written out. As Anne completes the different steps of the task analysis, it is important to reinforce her. You would move on to the next step when the first step is mastered. Now that we have talked so much about task analysis, let's look at some examples. This is a very basic example of a task analysis for toileting. Turn on the light, shut the door, sit on the toilet, wipe with toilet paper, flush the toilet, and wash your hands. Pictures were included in this, and often they are. Pictures help students who may not be able to read well or read at all understand the individual tasks. Every single one of these steps could be broken down further if need be. This particular task analysis would be used for a student who already knew what needed to be done when sitting on the toilet and when washing his hands. A student who never wiped with toilet paper would need more specific instructions on what that meant. Additionally, a student who did not know how to wash his or her hands properly would need more specific instructions on that as well. If the student did not know how to complete the complex task of washing hands, then this is a more specific example that might be used. It shows more exact steps from start to finish for the one task of washing your hands. First, turn the water on, wet your hands, rub hands with soap, rinse off your hands, turn the water off, and dry your hands. Again, pictures were used here as a visual aid. I'm not going to read all of the steps in this task analysis of brushing teeth, but I wanted to include one really specific task analysis of an everyday task that everyone could relate to. Some of our students need the directions to be this specific. They need to know what hand to use and what to do with it. While this is, again, extremely specific, it shows how task analysis can be used with really anyone to explain virtually any task. Here are the rest of the steps. This example came from the Grand Erie District School Board's Life Skills Program Planner. I'm including the link to the free PDF file that is available online. There are blank task analysis sheets as well as a breakdown for various activities in this planner, from hair washing to setting the table to understanding community science. Now it's your turn. Think about how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. How would you explain it to a person who had no idea how to make a sandwich? Pause the podcast and think about the possible steps now. So, did you think about how you would do it? It's probably more complex than you may ever even thought. I would start with gathering the materials needed to make the sandwich. If you forgot this step, that's okay. This may be obvious to most people, but if someone never made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich before, then they may not know where to start. Next, I would take out 2 pieces of bread and place them on the plate. Then open the jar of peanut butter. Take the butter knife and put peanut butter on it. Spread the peanut butter on one slice of bread on one side. Close the peanut butter jar. Open the jelly jar. Take the clean butter knife and put jelly on it. Spread the jelly on one slice of bread on one side. Close the jelly jar. Make a sandwich with the 2 pieces of bread. Cut the sandwich in half. Put the knives in the sink. Put away the bread, jelly, and peanut butter. Eat! Your steps might vary. Maybe you don't want your sandwich cut in half. Maybe you don't feel it's necessary to designate a piece of bread for the jelly and another for the peanut butter. You would adjust the steps as necessary depending on the student you are working with. You might include pictures as well. My steps could even be broken down further. For example, when getting the materials needed to make the sandwich, there might be a step per item along with its location, such as get the bread from the counter, and then get the peanut butter from the cabinet, etc. This could be altered based on the person's understanding of the smaller tasks involved. Steps may be expanded or eliminated, and it may be modified over time. Once the student learned how to gather the materials, you might reword that more simply. Let's look at an addition example to teach how to solve 5 plus 7 using counters. Pause the podcast now and think about the different chains you might include in your task analysis if you were trying to teach this to a first grader who was struggling with addition. Okay, now let's look at how I might go about this. First, I would have the student gather 20 counters every time he or she was going to work on addition, initially, because the numbers wouldn't be higher than that. If the student did not have the ability to count to 20 yet, then I would have the counters pre-counted in a Ziploc that could be grabbed by the student. Then, I would take the number of counters from the first add-in or number in the problem and put them in their own pile. In this case, it would be 5. Next, from the original pile, I would take the number of counters from the second add-in or number in the equation and put them in their own pile. In this case, that would be 7. Then I would put away any extras, if there were any, from the original pile. Then combine the 2 new piles that have been created and count the total number of counters to find your sum or total. Again, this can vary depending on the student's needs. The word add-in may just confuse some students. Or you might want to include it because it's a first grade math vocabulary word. There are all sorts of variations. It could get more specific or more simple. Before we wrap up the podcast, let's recap some of the main points. Task analysis is an evidence-based practice that breaks down a complex task into smaller, simpler, specific steps. These can be as specific as the brushing teeth example or as basic as the toileting example. Anyone can use task analysis and it can be used in any setting. Task analysis is taught with the use of chaining, prompts, and reinforcement. The steps for task analysis can be presented to the student in whatever way works best for that individual. Thanks for listening to this presentation on task analysis. If you're interested in the topic further, please feel free to visit these sites.